Welcome to the Chaka Strategy Podcast.
Welcome to the Chaka Strategy Podcast with Chaka Patterson. Chaka is a legal career strategist, former public company general counsel, former Fortune 100 treasurer, and head of investor relations. He's also a former AmLaw 50 partner who helps lawyers turn their legal expertise into business impact. I'm Lisa Mosbey, your host, and today we're talking about how lawyers can move from cost center to value creator and earn greater strategic influence. Chaka, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I'm excited to learn more.
Great. I'm glad to be here, and I look forward to our conversation.
Chaka, why are legal departments so often viewed as cost centers instead of value creators?
Yeah, so it has a lot to do with two things. One, how we as lawyers show up to the business people. So there's a perception problem. And then there's also a substantive problem in terms of how we as lawyers measure value relative to how the business, the people who employ us, measure value. So from a perception perspective, we often act like a cost center. So we will go to the CFO, and we're the only function that does this. We will go to the CFO and we will ask for resources from a negative perspective. Well, if we invest in this compliance tool, or if we invest in more compliance people, no one will go to jail this year, right? So that's how we ask. That's how we ask for resources, right? No one will get in trouble this year. Everybody else in the business comes and asks for resources using capital budgeting tools, right? Because all resources are just capital allocation, right? The CFO has capital, has money, and has to distribute it, has to allocate it, right? And so everybody else comes and talks about the return on investment. They talk about the payback period of the investment. They talk about how the investment meets the company's hurdle rate, right? The opportunity cost of the investment. They talk about the internal rate of return. They talk about the net present value of the investment. And so that the CFO can see, oh, this is a good investment relative to other things that we could do. So we don't ask for resources the way other people do. So that's already a friction with the CFO. So the CFO perceives us as a cost center because all he or she has heard is, oh, I better do this or else, right? And the or else is not quantified. And so there's simply no way to really appreciate whether that's the legal department crying wolf or whether that's a real thing, right? And so instead of coming to the CFO saying, hey, we got to invest $1 million in compliance, or else if we came and we said, listen, here's how this $1 million will generate a return on the investment. The return will happen over a 3-year period. The return is higher than our hurdle rate, than our opportunity cost of capital. The internal rate of return is higher than other investments that we have made. And when you net present value that $1 million, it compares favorably to the other things the business is thinking about investing in. Now, that's an entirely different way of asking for resources, right? Because now it's what? It's a conversation. It's a partnership because we're speaking the CFO's language, right? The CFO doesn't know whether we're crying wolf or not if we say, hey, we need $1 million for compliance or else everybody's going to jail, right? The CFO doesn't know, he or she doesn't know law. They can't make heads or tails of that. But they know net present value. They know internal rate of return. They know return on investment. They know payback period. So now the conversation is, well, let's talk about the inputs. What if we change the input slightly? What does that do to net present value? What does that do to return on investment? What does that do to IRR, right? Now it's a conversation. And once you have the CFO playing with the inputs, we're going to get something, right? So because we're speaking the same language and the CFO is able to do with the legal department what the CFO does with every other department, and that makes for a real partnership, not a clash of wills, clash of titans, clash of politics. And so if we acted like we were a strategic asset, if we acted like we were an investment rather than a cost center, that perception would greatly change, and we would be able to demonstrate our value in terms of business impact.
And I want to talk about that clash, the mindset from either side, the lawyers versus the business leaders. Why do so many lawyers believe they're adding value while business leaders often see them differently? Bottom line.
Yeah, and what it really comes down to is we're just measuring different things. So
Okay.
most in-house lawyers, not all, but most come from either the private sector or the government. And in both the private sector and the government, value is often measured by volume, right? How many you are. So if you're in private practice, how many hours did you bill? If you're in the government, if you're a prosecutor, how many cases did you indict? How many cases did you take to trial? How many plea agreements did you get? So everything is measured in volume. So then we come into these in-house roles and we think all we're doing is just changing jobs. We have no idea that we're doing something completely different. And so we do the same thing. So we measure by volume. Oh, we reviewed this many contracts. We handled this many cases on the litigation side. We helped close this many deals last year. And that's not how the business measures value. The business measures value in terms of revenue, margin, EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. They measure in terms of net income, cash flow, risk, new markets opened, growth year over year in stock growth, or if you're in a private company, typically it's going to be some kind of revenue growth. And so we don't connect our volume-based values to the business's business outcomes values, and that disconnect creates a lot of friction and frustration that has the legal team thinking that they're killing it and the business team thinking that they're killing the business. So that's that's the fundamental problem.
The way that I interpret that in my brain is something like this. How do you make me money? How do you save me money and not be an expense on the profit and loss? How do you make me money? How do you save me money? If you can interpret what you do in that language, we're going to be advisors. You're going to be a partner in this business with me. So what are some ways lawyers can contribute to revenue profitability or growth without stepping outside of their legal role?
Yeah, so there are any number of ways, and and so a lot of what I do in my business is I try to approach it from both sides, from the law side, but also from the business side, to help both sides see that the legal department is really well positioned to be a strategic asset rather than a cost center, because the legal department has the ability to help the business build competitive moats around the business. So, the most obvious place is contracts. So one of the simple examples I like to give is, if you really understand business and you understand the business, if you look at the balance sheet, for example, and you have accounts receivable, people owe you money. You have accounts payable, you owe people money, right? So in theory, what you really want is contracts that allow the business to get paid in 30 days and to pay its own vendors in 90 days. That's 60 days of cash flow that the legal department has created through contracting that the finance team will then go invest in some short-term investment. That interest income goes on the income statement. Voila, you've created additional cash flow and income just through contracts. Same thing with bad debt expense. Like I did a presentation for a company where their bad debt expense, that is expense that the business is just completely written off. The business is like, we're never going to collect that. Their bad debt expense was equal to the entire legal budget. So I was like, listen, no one in this business is set up to do collections other than you guys. So if you guys could figure out through contracting, like, how do we make it so that that it is unattractive for customers not to pay us? Can we put in, really onerous penalties? Can we put in mandatory arbitration? Can we put in the arbitration provisions? You have to pick an arbitrator in a week. The arbitrator has to render their decision in 30 days, right? So there's all kinds of things we can do to make not paying us unattractive and to make collections easier. If they just cut that bad debt in half, that's half their legal budget. And so that's another way that, right? Because that's just, and by the way, that's just found money, right? That's literally found cash that the business had written off. Another thing the legal department can do is the regulatory, right? If you can get the regulatory schemes right, you can enable the business to enter new markets. You can enable the business to enter new international markets. You can enable the business to produce new products. And if you can figure out the regulatory regime in the right way, that is a competitive advantage, because if you could do it in a way that your competitors can't, then you've created that competitive moat around the business. So that's just a few ways in which the legal department, without ever stepping outside their lane, can add a tremendous amount of value, cash flow, revenue, new markets, growth, the kinds of things that the business itself measures as value. You can do all that from right inside the legal lane.
We don't think of it as lawyers being able to pay for themselves in a business environment, but you absolutely can. I see how all of those things will play together. How should legal leaders measure their impact if they want to be viewed as strategic contributors to the business?
Yeah. So to me, the number one thing is look at the business's key performance indicators, KPIs, and make sure that your KPIs match those, right? In other words, what are we going to do in the legal department to enable the business to meet its KPIs, right? So we shouldn't, like I was just advising somebody a couple weeks ago, they sent me their goals for the year, right? Their equivalent of KPIs. And, they're a public company. So I just went to their proxy statement, pulled the KPIs from the proxy statement, compared it to my client's goals. And I said, your goals do not match any of these KPIs, not a single one. So you think what you're doing is adding value, but what you think is valuable is not, because the business is committed to doing these 5 things, and you're committed to doing a separate set of 5 things. Your KPI, your goals need to match the business's KPIs, and by match I mean enable the business to meet its KPIs. So everything you're doing in the legal department needs to line up to helping the business achieve its goals and its outcomes.
Can you use AI to do that, Chaka?
You can. I think it depends on what the goals are, but I could certainly imagine, whether you're in a public or private company, once you have the business's goals for the year, you could certainly pop those into an AI tool and use a series of prompts to basically say, what can the legal department do to enable the business to reach these goals? So, and even if it's not a perfect fit, it can at least get you started on your own thinking around how to have better goals, better meaning your goals match the business's goals, or at a minimum, match how you're going to enable the business to meet its goals. And that's just a much different conversation, right? You can imagine walking into the room of a senior leader as a lawyer and saying, hey, I see your goal is to increase the revenue in your division by 10% this year. Here are my 3 ideas from the legal department on how we can help you do that. That's an entirely different and very welcome conversation than most lawyers have with divisional operators.
And AI is not going to give you all the answers, but it's at least going to get your brain thinking about what that language, what that conversation would look like in bringing those 2 pieces together.
For sure. It can definitely help you do that.
Yeah. So, Chaka, if a lawyer wants to be seen as a value creator rather than a cost center, where should they focus their efforts first? That's where I want to wrap up today.
Yeah. So again, if I were still in house and I wanted to be seen as a value creator, that's what I would do. Is I would go to the heads of each operating division, and I would want to have coffee, lunch, whatever it is, really understand what their goals are for the year, what their KPIs are. And then I'd come with some ideas on how, or maybe I'd go back to the lab, go to AI, whatever, then come back and say, hey, I want to have a follow-up with you because I want to talk to you about the 3 ideas I have for how legal can help you achieve your KPIs for the year. And that is, a dramatically different way, because now what you're doing is you're extending partnership. Hey, I want to partner with you to help you achieve your goals. Number 1. Number 2, I'm doing it in my lane. I'm not trying to be you. I'm not trying to be an operator. I'm doing me, right? My legal expertise, but I've turned my legal expertise into business impact for you. And that's and that is going to be a well-received conversation, because again, most business people will take value added from any source because there's a lot of pressure on them to demonstrate value and to meet their goals. And so if legal, right, particularly an unexpected source, comes and says, hey, we can help you do that, that is going to be a welcome partnership.
Chaka, that's where we're going to leave it today. And I have to tell you, I can't wait till the next episode. Every time I sit with you, my brain wants to just explode. You have so much information and such a unique perspective on how this partnership between lawyers and business owners is shifting, and we're going in the right direction. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for today's episode of the Chaka Strategy Podcast with Chaka Patterson. If today's conversation resonated with you, go even deeper with Chaka's book, The Hot Seat: Mastering the Public Company General Counsel Role, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. If you'd like to learn more about Chaka's workshops or legal teams, executive coaching, executive education courses, and other resources for legal professionals, visit chakastrategy.com. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to like, leave a review, and come on back next time. It'll be more fun than ever.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.